Richard Petty did not hold back, not even a little bit. When a seven-time NASCAR Cup Series champion goes on his podcast and calls a driver out by name, the entire sport stops and listens. And that is exactly what happened after Sunday's Cookout 400 at Martinsville Speedway, a race that started with high hopes for Bubba Wallace and ended with 12 cars in the wall, a championship in free fall, and one of the most discussed incidents of the 2026 NASCAR season. This was not supposed to be the story coming out of Martin. Bubba Wallace entered that race sitting third in the Cup Series championships. He had turned in 4 finishes of 11th or better in his first 5 races. At one point, he sat second in the standings. Everything pointed toward 2026 being a potential breakthrough year, or the kind of season that ends with a legitimate title run. Then came lap 324. Before getting to the wreck itself, there is critical context that explains why the entire NASCAR community reacted the way it did. Wallace's teammate Tyler Reich had been on an unprecedented tear to open the season. Reich became the first driver in history to win the first 3 Cup Series races of a season. He went on to win 4 of the first 6 races, a level of dominance that has simply never been seen before in NASCAR's modern era. That kind of performance from a teammate creates pressure that builds quietly. According to Kyle Petty, Richard's son, and a NASCAR analyst, that pressure had been building inside Wallace, for it would eventually find a release valve at Martinsville. Carson Jose Var is not a driver who goes unnoticed. The 23-year-old driving the number 77 Spire of Motorsports Chevrolet has earned the nickname Hurricane Jose Var for a reason. His aggressive style on track has made him a lightning rod for controversy throughout his young career. Many drivers, fans, and analysts have been quick to blame him when things go sideways on track. But at Martinsville on lap 323, what Jose Var did was not controversial. It was simply hard short track racing. On a restart, Jose Var drove 3 wide underneath Wallace, heading into turn 1. There was minor contact. Jose Var got past Wallace coming out of turn 2. That is the kind of bold, aggressive move that Martinsville reward. It was legal. It was competitive. It was exactly the kind of racing the sport celebrates. Wallace did not see it that way. As the field headed into turn 3, Wallace pulled right up behind Jose Var's bumper. It gave him a hard shove, then he did it again. He kept pushing into the rear of Var's number 77 through turns 3 and 4, not once, not twice, but multiple times. On the exit of turn 4, Jose Var's car finally snapped around on the front stretch. The cars behind had nowhere to go. 12 cars were collected in the wreck that followed. Daniel Suarez, Chris Beiser, Austin Dillon, Austin Hill, Zane Smith, John Hunter Nemechek, Eric Jones, Michael McDowell, Connor Zilisch, and even Wallace's own 2-3-1-1 racing teammate, Riley Hurst, were all swept up in it. That is an enormous portion of the field wiped out in a single moment on lap 324. Jose Var's team repaired his car enough to keep him on the lead lap, while he worked his way back through the field and ultimately crossed the finish line in 17th place, matching his best ever result at Martinsville Speedway for a driver whose car had just been destroyed on the front stretch. That was a remarkable recovery. Wallace was not so fortunate. His day was over on the spot. He was credited with a 36th place finish, his worst result of the 2026 season and his first DNF of the year. He was taken to the infield care center for evaluation before being released to speak with the media. Wallace met Fox Sports reporter Jamie Little on Pittsburgh Road shortly after and did not attempt to dodge the moment. He addressed it directly. "I misjudged. I didn't appreciate the 3 wide into 1. Fine, but I misjudged the center of the corner and didn't mean to turn him." So Wallace's position was clear. Well, he was frustrated by Jose Var's three-wide move. That frustration influenced his decision to respond, but the wreck itself was a mistake. He claims he never intended to spin Jose Var, only to bump him, and that he misjudged his speed and positioning. In the problem is that the replay tells a more complicated story. Wallace did not make one contact with Jose Var. He made multiple. He hit the back of Jose Var's car repeatedly across turns 3 and 4. That sequence of events is what made the NASCAR world push back so hard on the misjudgment explanation. Kevin Harvick, working the Fox Sports broadcast from a booth, called it out live as it was happening. He stated that Wallace drove straight through the number 77 car and suggested that there was something deeper going on with Wallace that day, that this was not a racing incident, but an emotional one. Harvick pointed out that Wallace had already been having a difficult race before the contact with Jose Var, which provided the context for what the television audience was watching unfold in real. But the voice that carried the most weight came on Monday. Richard Petty, the King, had been at Martinsville Speedway in person on Sunday. He saw the entire sequence with his own eyes. The following day, he addressed it on his podcast, The Petty Race Recap. His co-host, longtime NASCAR figure Dale Eamon, tried to soften the description of the incident. Eamon suggested that Wallace had simply kind of gotten into Jose Var. Petty was not having it, kind of got into him. He just drove on in there and knocked the door out of him. That is as direct as it gets in any sport. When a 7-time champion with over 1,000 career starts tells you that you knocked the door out of somebody, that carries an authority that no broadcast analyst or social media hot take can match. Richard Petty was not speculate. He was not offering a hot take. He watched it happen from inside the speedway and told the world exactly what he saw. Kyle Petty, Richard's son, and a respected NASCAR analyst went even further on the Inside the Race podcast. He brought a layer of psychological insight that nobody else in the conversation had introduced. Kyle acknowledged that frustration is real and part of racing. He admitted openly that he has both been wrecked and wrecked other drivers himself over the course of his career. But then he made the point that reframed the entire conversation. Kyle Petty argued that Wallace was dealing with what he called double frustration at Martinsville. The first source was straightforward. Wallace was already having a bad day on the track before the incident with Jose Var. The second source was something that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks, watching his own teammate, Tyler Reich, dominate the sport in a way that no driver in NASCAR history had ever done. "You race your teammates," Kyle Petty said. "I don't give a rat's rear end in what anybody says. You race your teammates. You want me top of the heap, king of the hill in your own team." And I think there's some frustration and some pin-up anger in that when you get into it. That is a significant claim, and it is grounded in the reality of how professional athletes compare. Reich winning 4 of the first 6 races of the season, while his 2-3-1-1 racing teammate Wallace was fighting for position in the middle of the pack, creates an internal tension that does not go away on its compounds. Calpati's argument is that on lap 323, when Jose Var made that 3-wide move, he did not just light a short fuse, he lit one that had already been burning for weeks. Kyle Petty also made a specific point of defending Jose Var from the crowd of critics who were looking to assign him some share of the blame. Jose Var has a reputation for aggression, and that reputation often works against him when incidents occur near him. Calpati rejected that framing directly. Hocevar is an easy target right now because you almost wreck Hocevar, and everybody says, "Oh, well, that's just Zver. He had that coming." In this case, I don't think Joseph ever had this coming, man. Taking you 3 wide at Martinsville is not cause for what we're seeing right here on the screen. NASCAR analyst Steve Lard offered a slightly different read on the situation. He did not dispute that Wallace meant to make contact with Jose Var, but he suggested the intent was to bump him and move him, not to wreck him. Lord's position was that Wallace simply pushed too hard on the throttle and misjudged how much force he was applying. At a short track like Martinsville, the difference between a bump that moves someone and a bump that spins them can be measured in fractions of a second on the gas pedal. By interpretation, Wallace understood the line. He just crossed it without meaning to. The reaction from Wallace's own team hit harder than anything that came from outside it. Freddie Kraft, Wallace's spotter, the crew member positioned in the spotter stand who communicates car positions to the driver throughout the race, went on the Door Bumper Clear podcast and chose to be completely transparent about what had happened. There's not really any sugarcoating about it. I got to take Bubba for his word. Kraft accepted Wallace's explanation that it was a misjudgment, but he did not try to minimize the impact of it. He said he misjudged, and if he misjudged, it was a really bad misjudgment, and it hurts. Then Kraft laid out the championship math in terms that made the scale of the damage impossible to ignore. We went from third in points to now we're tied for eighth with 5 other guys. In practical terms, given how the tie-breaking process works, Wallace had fallen from third to effectively 11th in the standings. A collapse of 8 positions in a single afternoon. Kraft did not stop there. He addressed the bigger picture of what this kind of moment means for a team with championship ambitions. You can't have those moments. And if you want to be a contender for the championship or a contender to be top 5, top 7, 8th in points, whatever it is, that *T can't happen. And then came the word that cut the deepest. Unfortunately, we ended our day yesterday self-inflicted. Self-inflicted, not a mechanical failure, not a tire going down at the wrong moment, not another driver taking Wallace out through no fault of his own. This was Wallace making a choice or a misjudgment, depending on whose account you accept, that ended his own race, damaged his own championship standing, and collected his own teammate in the process. While Wallace himself, after being released from the infield care center, reflected on the situation with a line that captured the frustration of a driver who cannot figure out why a promising season keeps coming apart. We can win Saturday in practice, just don't show up on Sunday. I hate it for our team, just frustration. Take a week off and reset and go on a Bristol. Back-to-back DNFs at Darlington and Martinsville had now wiped out everything Wallace had built in the opening stretch of the season. 4 top 11 finishes in the first 5 races, a second-place position in the standings at one point, all of it erased across 2 weekends. The new NASCAR point system, as Fox Sports Motorsports insider Bob Pockrass noted, makes emotional decisions in race cars more costly than they have ever been. Under the current chase format, there is no win in element to fall back on. Every point from every finish accumulates across the regular season and determines playoff positioning. Pockrass calculated that Wallace finished the race with just 1 championship point, while Jose Var, whose car his team had a partially rebuild, mid-race finished with 20. That 19-point swing between the 2 drivers in a single race is the kind of damage that takes multiple strong weekends to recover from. There is one final layer of irony in all of this. Martinsville Speedway is Bubba Wallace's favorite track. He has won 2 Truck Series races at the paperclip-shaped short track and has spoken openly throughout his career about how comfortable he feels. On Sunday, March 29th, 2026, it bit him as hard as any track ever has. Meanwhile, Jose Var handled the entire aftermath with a composure that made Wallace's frustration look even more costly by comparison. On the team radio right after the wreck, as his damaged car was sliding across the front stretch, Jose Var said simply, "Bubba shake and bake," a Talladega Nights reference delivered in the middle of an actual crash. In his post-race media comments, Jose Var was measured and forward-looking, expressing satisfaction with his team's recovery effort and focusing his attention on the upcoming race at Bristol Motor Speedway. The NASCAR Cup Series will take 1 week off before returning at Bristol on April 12th for the Food City 500. Wallace will arrive there sitting 11th in points, carrying back-to-back DNFs and facing questions about whether the early promise of his 2026 season could be salvaged. Bristol is another short track, the kind of place where emotions run high and mistakes are punished. And Richard Petty saw what happened at Martinsville. Freddie Kraft called it self-inflicted. Kyle Petty laid out the psychological architecture behind it, and Bubba Wallace now has 1 week to figure out how to leave all of it behind before the sport return. The damage is done. The question now is what comes.